On Friday, President Bola Tinubu approved the nomination of Mr. Olayemi Michael Cardoso to serve as the new governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria for a term of 5 years pending its confirmation by the Nigerian Senate. This directive is in conformity with Section 8(1) of the Central Bank of Nigeria's Act 2007, which vests in the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria the authority to appoint the governor and 4 deputy governors for the Central Bank of Nigeria, subject to confirmation by the Senate of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Let's talk more about this, and I'm going to continue this discussion because we started this earlier. Chief Consultant, B. Adedipe Associates Limited, Dr. Biodun Adedipe. He's with over 40 years of postgraduate work experience in investment banking, project finance, business consulting, and leadership in business. Not-for-profit organizations. Dr. Adedipe's illustrious career has taken him through the University of Lagos, Enterprise Consulting Group, the World Bank, International Merchant Bank, First City Monument. I can go on and on. Dr. Adedipe, thank you so much. It's good to see you today and start the week with you on Business Nigeria.
Thank you for having me, Tolu. It's a pleasure being here this afternoon.
Yes, just like I said the other day, when that list came up, we've been seeing lots of reactions surrounding the names around that, in the name, the deputy governors and for the governor of the Apex Bank. So again, I'm going to ask you that what really strikes you or makes you think that the president has made the right choice?
Thank you so very much. Now, when you look at the central bank in any economy around the world, it is very, very important, very fundamental in doing 3 things for the economy. First is to set confidence, and then the second is about direction, and of course, control. In which case, you look first and foremost at the governor, because the governor is at the apex of that institution, which is very critical to the economy. So the confidence that appointee inspires by his choices, his decisions, even utterances followed with actions, mean a whole lot in terms of economic actors developing confidence or losing it. And that is very, very important. Now, the second thing I mentioned is setting the direction, which in fact mostly depends on the utterances of whoever holds that office. And that is why all over the world, and we have had our own experiences here in Nigeria, that whenever the head of the central bank or reserve bank, as the case may be, speaks, typically analysts will gather around and interpret what he or she has said. And of course, even to some extent, in the days of Alan Greenspan, for example, in Federal Reserve in the US, the very color of the tie the man wore, or the way he carried this brief, was interpreted by analysts as a pointer to the direction the central bank will go. So that is why that office is very, very important. So for me, looking at the pedigree of Olayemi Cardoso, he has 2 important things to look for in whoever holds that office. Number 1 is competence. And of course, the second is integrity. Wherever any of those 2 come together, and whoever is the governor of the central bank, we have a confidence quotient that rises, and therefore you can look to an improvement in the environment of business better than what we had in the previous, let me say, leadership. Now, I say that also deliberately because the governor is very key. The deputies will help whoever the governor is to execute what he or she has put forward as the direction that the central bank will go, and of course in leading the economy as well. So their own role is to man specific offices, job roles within the institution. So the number 1 man or woman is very, very critical. And I think the president has made the right call in my own assessment.
A good way to start this conversation. But I want to ask, like a layman would want to ask, during the last dispensation administration of the former governor of the Apex Bank, we saw a series of interventions away from the norm. We saw interventions in agriculture, so intent. We saw investments also in the pharmaceutical space, the creative industry. A lot of moves, and some would tell you that the CBN was actually moving away from the core mandate of which the bank was actually established. I want you to make us really understand what should be their focus. Monetary policy, managing our currency and all of that. Dr. Adipe, please educate us more on this.
All right, thank you so very much. Now, some have described this in the last dispensation and leadership of the central bank as mission drift because of these various intervention schemes that were introduced. You look, for example, at the one you mentioned, Anchor Borrower Program. Some have argued that it should rather have been done through the structure existing, and that is commercial banking. Equally for me, as a player within this sector, I don't see why central bank should set up NESA Microfinance Bank when we have in place many microfinance banks. Some are very big and well structured that could have also accomplished the objective of setting up that particular microfinance bank. So there were several other schemes. Of course, those proponents of that will argue that that fell within the context of the developmental role of the central bank, which ideally is something that should be done within a short window of time, in which case you don't build an enduring structure or institution to address such challenges. It is supposed to be intervention in the true sense of the word, which is something you do, quickly and then you get out of it. But now setting up institutions and structures that are enduring to address that, for me, is where the central bank actually went on a drift. So one of the things, therefore, we want to encourage the new leadership of the central bank is to return to the primary function of the central bank, which is monetary policy. And as we mentioned in our last discussion, that focuses on, one, the price of money, the cost of money, and then, of course, the availability of money. That is talking about supply, money supply. Of course, again, in the broad sense of it, we say that you want to democratize credit, which means making credit available, making it accessible, and making it affordable, which, of course, is part of the agenda of financial inclusion anyway. So, but this is a very good opportunity for central bank to return to its original mandate as specified for central and reserve banks anywhere in the world, and that is to concentrate on monetary policy.
One big thing that everyone remembers the former governor for is the redesign of Naira notes, which everyone actually went through that hardship. I went through it too because we didn't have the cash. And even as we speak, we still really don't have the new notes in circulation. We have more of the old notes. But some would say, the law says that the CBN has the capacity, the right to do that, to go through that process, to redesign the notes at a particular time. But what would you say should be done if we are to embark on this kind of move again, so that we won't have the kind of hardship that Nigerians went through earlier this year?
Yeah, thank you so very much. Now, in this instance, the central bank combined two things that should be separate. The first is the process of currency management, which typically anywhere in the world, you don't want a particular currency to remain in circulation for too long a period of time to become an incentive to counterfeiting. Because the longer the currency is in circulation, the easier it is for those who counterfeit to perfect that process, and therefore produce currencies that will even be hard for the central banker that issue it to have difficulty in deciding which one is genuine and which one is fake. So, and that is why there's always a window of time central banks will consider before you replace a currency. That is on the one hand. That's a normal function of the central bank anywhere in the world. But the other side to it is what we call demonetization. Demonetization simply means that you want to make citizens move away from using cash for their normal commercial transactions and now move on to digital platforms where they can use digital currencies, to transact, or maybe use technology platforms that are available to make their financial transactions. Now, that is the one we call demonetization. Unfortunately, the central bank under the expert leadership combined both, and then also brought a very short window of time that made it very difficult for them to produce enough of the new currency to replace the over 3 I think we're talking about over 3, is it trillion now that was out there in circulation. So the challenge really is, even as we speak today, we don't yet have enough of the new currency in circulation. Some data I came across last week indicated a figure around 400 billion naira of the new currency, which is 2.7 there about, or 2.8 trillion of the old currency still in circulation, which means this is September. We're looking at December, like indicated, by the president and maybe also some other actors within that space, that we have this old currency still remain with us till December. But I think that what is advisable for the new leadership of central bank is to interrogate that issue again and ask ourselves, to what extent do we depend on cash? Because Nigerian economy, basically as of today, is still largely cash driven. We must come to terms with that reality. So forcing many of us, therefore, to migrate to digital platforms will not be productive. In fact, it will become counterproductive for an economy that is cash driven. So we need a lot more time, not only to produce, but for people to understand and also adopt doing commercial transactions on digital platforms. That is something that should be of immediate importance also to the new leadership of the Central Bank of Nigeria. We didn't learn from the mistake that India made a few years ago. It was a fiasco, similar to what we experienced in Nigeria. So we refuse to learn from that. And we're more concerned with just achieving our own objective. Possibly, that's like some have argued, and political coloration as well.
Indeed. Yeah, a lot of speculations then around that too, that there was political coloration to it. But let's move on very quickly so that we take advantage of having you, Dr. Adedipe. The foreign exchange market is that big, should I say that's the elephant in the cupboard or in the room as we move on with regards to the central bank. We saw that at a point, and even up to now, I don't think the BDCs are getting FX from the central bank. The central bank also limited some business people from getting FX to bring in some particular products like toothpicks and all of that, things we could produce in country. Yeah. At the moment, there is an opening up of the market by the new administration, trying to see how we can strike a balance. In all of this, how do you think the CBN can come in? Not to just continue to support and support. How sustainable is all of this?
Well, my approach to this is to ask ourselves a simple question. How did we get to where we are? That did not happen overnight. So wanting, therefore, a quick fix will not solve the problem. And this has been my argument when it comes to the exchange value of the Naira. Typically, what we have done over the years was each time when FX crisis like now, we call it in general currency crisis, okay? What we want to do is, what do we change within the policy environment that will encourage foreign investors to bring in funds here? That is the mistake we have made repeatedly over the decades. Now, typically, the most will really encourage in terms of inflows will be portfolio investments, which would be nice for the time. But the moment there's any signal of trouble, they troop out and they will return to your crisis. But of course, unfortunately, in doing that also, you would have devalued your currency, so making now a lot more Naira to be required to buy one single unit of a major trading currency. But for us in Nigeria, dollar is the reference currency most of the time. So which means then that in order for us to change this narrative, we have to be conscious and also deliberate, intentional about doing two things. One is domestic manufacturing. The second, of course, is export. And the way they interact is simply this. And I've made this argument over 30 years, that I've been in this space, that you cannot get an economy developed strongly and also its currency following that until you begin to produce most of what you consume locally. If we still depend on imports to not only feed our factories, to feed the citizens and families, we will still be dependent on those foreign currencies. We call them derivatives. Which the demand for dollars is a derivative most of the time. Now, it means I won't need the dollar unless I have to pay for some imports. January to June this year, our monthly import bill averaged 1.88 trillion naira. Okay, using the official exchange rate, that's like $2.48 billion every month we spent on merchandise import the first half of the year. Now, that is unsustainable. Although some will argue also that in terms of the size of our economy, that the GDP relative to imports, we are not importing enough. Fine. I don't have any problem with that. But that is simply, mechanical analysis. The reality is that we are not producing enough locally here. The flip side of it is that if you strengthen manufacturing, it goes the way of import substitution at first. But secondly, is now see what can we produce for the rest of the world. We can stay with Africa in the light of the African, continental free trade agreement, and ask ourselves, most of these African countries, what do they import? Mostly, they are top 20 imports. From where? Around the world. So is there a possibility for our governments to provide incentives and support for the manufacturers of those items so that we can take the African market first, which is estimated at about $3.4 trillion, okay, waiting for the taking. So that can be the direction we want to move. Not necessarily now exporting to the rest of the world, but Africa in particular. So we then forge a link between domestic manufacturing and manufacturing for export, which is non-oil, by the way. So until we do that deliberately, and the result will not happen overnight. Maybe I should also mention this, Kolu, and that the fact that the government also needs to enforce the law that defines that our legal tender in Nigeria is Naira. So if there is any entity that is either selling assets or providing services in any currency other than Naira, there should be a move to sanction such entities. To what extent would it help the Naira if there are some schools in Nigeria here that charge their school fees in dollars, or some people in real estate that sell their assets in dollars? Now, that doesn't help the economy in any way. Okay, that's also an important angle to look at. We are dollarizing the economy instead of working on ways to strengthen the Naira.
Interesting stuff. Now, Doc, let's wrap up on this note as I let you go. United States General Assembly is looking pretty for Nigeria and investment. President Tinubu will ring the bell at NASDAQ. So I'm seeing that investors' confidence, that global unity, people coming together, getting to understand their challenge, and Nigeria is not being left behind in this. What will be your reaction to this and, of course, the theme of the event?
Yeah. For me, we are going in the right direction. And why do I say that? You notice in my earlier remark, I said our focus over the years had always been that any time of currency crisis, we want to liberalize the market, do one thing or the other to attract foreign investors, most of which turned out to be portfolio investors, okay? But this drive is about foreign direct investment, where people will now come to Nigeria and set up factories and produce locally. Now, we have an advantage that we have not emphasized so far in the way we market Nigeria, and that the fact of cheap labor. That was what the East Asians did for them to become what we now refer to as the Asian tigers, all right? They pushed forward the fact that labor in their country was cheap relative to the countries of those investors. That is what you should put as part of the story. So in which case, if labor is cheap here, and of course we have a conducive environment where the sanctity of contract, rule of law is obeyed, and all of those things that excite investors, then the drive the president is doing currently for foreign direct investment will become more attractive to those investors. And that is what Nigeria needs. We don't need portfolio investors. We need foreign direct investors that the president is going after in all these things he's doing.
I must thank you so much, Dr. Biodun Adedipe, Chief Consultant, B. Adedipe Associates Limited. Thank you so much for starting the week with us on Business Nigeria. We appreciate this.
Thank you for having me. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, you too.